Judges, chapter 1. A time came after the death of Joshua when the people of Israel asked God, "Who will take the lead in going up against the Canaanites to fight them?" And God said, "Judah will go. I've given the land to him." The men of Judah said to those of their brother Simeon, "Go up with us to our territory and we'll fight the Canaanites. Then we'll go with you to your territory." And Simeon went with them. So Judah went up. God gave them the Canaanites and the Perizzites. They defeated them at Bezek, 10 military units. They caught up with my master Bezek there and fought him. They smashed the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My master Bezek ran, but they gave chase and caught him. They cut off his thumbs and big toes. My master Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to crawl under my table, scavenging. Now, God has done to me what I did to them." They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. The people of Judah attacked and captured Jerusalem, subduing the city by sword, and then sending it up in flames. After that, they had gone down to fight the Canaanites who were living in the hill country, the Negev, and the foothills. Judah had gone on to the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba, and brought Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai to their knees. From there, they had marched against the population of Debir. Debir used to be called Kiriath Sepher. Caleb had said, "Whoever attacks Kiriath Sepher and takes it, I'll give my daughter Achsah to him as his wife." Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's brother, took it. So Caleb gave him his daughter Achsah as his wife. When she arrived, she got him to ask for farmland from her father. As she dismounted from her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What would you like?" She said, "Give me a marriage gift. You've given me desert land. Now, give me pools of water." And he gave her the upper and the lower pools. The people of Hobab the Kenite, Moses' relative, went up with the people of Judah from the city of palms to the wilderness of Judah at the descent of Arad. They settled down there with the Amalekites. The people of Judah went with their kin, the Simeonites, and struck the Canaanites who lived in Zephath. They carried out the holy curse and named the city Curse Town. But Judah didn't manage to capture Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron with their territories. God was certainly with Judah in that they took over the hill country, but they couldn't oust the people on the plain because they had iron chariots. They gave Hebron to Caleb as Moses had directed. Caleb drove out the 3 sons of Anak. But the people of Benjamin couldn't get rid of the Jebusites living in Jerusalem. Benjaminites and Jebusites live side by side in Jerusalem to this day. The house of Joseph went up to attack Bethel. God was with them. Joseph sent out spies to look the place over. Bethel used to be known as Luz. The spies saw a man leaving the city and said to him, "Show us a way into the city, and we'll treat you well." The man showed them a way in. They killed everyone in the city but the man and his family. The man went to Hittite country and built a city. He named it Luz. That's its name to this day. But Manasseh never managed to drive out Beth-shan, Taanach, Dor, Ibleam, and Megiddo with their territories. The Canaanites dug in their heels and wouldn't budge. When Israel became stronger, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they never got rid of them. Neither did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. The Canaanites stuck it out and lived there with them. Nor did Zebulun drive out the Canaanites in Kitron or Nahalol. They kept living there, but they were put to forced labor. Nor did Asher drive out the people of Akko, Sidon, Alab, Akzib, Helba, Aphek, and Rehob. Asher went ahead and settled down with the Canaanites, since they could not get rid of them. Naphtali fared no better. They couldn't drive out the people of Beth-Shemesh or Beth-Anath, so they just moved in and lived with them. They did, though, put them to forced labor. The Amorites pushed the people of Dan up into the hills and wouldn't let them down on the plains. The Amorites stubbornly continued to live in Mount Heres, Aijalon, and Shaalbim. But when the house of Joseph got the upper hand, they were put to forced labor. The Amorite border extended from Scorpion's Pass and Selah upward. Chapter 2. God's angel went up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, "I brought you out of Egypt. I led you to the land that I promised to your fathers. And I said, I'll never break my covenant with you. Never. And you're never to make a covenant with the people who live in this land. Tear down their altars. But you haven't obeyed me. What's this that you are doing? So now I'm telling you that I won't drive them out before you. They'll trip you up, and their gods will become a trap." When God's angel had spoken these words to all the people of Israel, they cried out. Oh, how they wept. They named the place Bochum, weepers, and there they sacrificed to God. After Joshua had dismissed them, the people of Israel went off to claim their allotted territories and take possession of the land. The people worshipped God throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the time of the leaders who survived him, leaders who had been in on all of God's great work that he had done for Israel. Then Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of God, died. He was 110 years old. They buried him in his allotted inheritance at Timnath-Heres in the hills of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Eventually, that entire generation died and was buried. Then, another generation grew up that didn't know anything of God or the work he had done for Israel. The people of Israel did evil in God's sight. They served Baal gods. They deserted God, the God of their parents who had led them out of Egypt. They took up with other gods, gods of the peoples around them. They actually worshipped them. And oh, how they angered God as they worshipped God Baal and goddess Astarte. God's anger was hot against Israel. He handed them off to plunderers who stripped them. He sold them cheap to enemies on all sides. They were helpless before their enemies. Every time they walked out the door, God was with them. But for evil, just as God had said, just as he had sworn he would do, they were in a bad way. But then God raised up judges who saved them from their plunderers. But they wouldn't listen to their judges. They prostituted themselves to other gods, worshipped them. They lost no time leaving the road walked by their parents, the road of obedience to God's commands. They refused to have anything to do with it. When God was setting up judges for them, he would be right there with the judge. He would save them from their enemy's oppression as long as the judge was alive, for God was moved to compassion when he heard their groaning because of those who afflicted and beat them. But when the judge died, the people went right back to their old ways, but even worse than their parents, running after other gods, serving and worshiping them. Stubborn as mules, they didn't drop a single evil practice. And God's anger blazed against Israel. He said, "Because these people have thrown out my covenant that I commanded their parents and haven't listened to me, I'm not driving out one more person from the nations that Joshua left behind when he died. I'll use them to test Israel and see whether they stay on God's road and walk down it as their parents did." That's why God let those nations remain. He didn't drive them out or let Joshua get rid of them. Chapter 3. These are the nations that God left there, using them to test the Israelites who had no experience in the Canaanite wars. He did it to train the descendants of Israel, the ones who had no battle experience in the art of war. He left the 5 Philistine tyrants, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites living on Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon to Hamath's Pass. They were there to test Israel and see whether they would obey God's commands that were given to their parents through Moses. But the people of Israel made themselves at home among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They married their daughters and gave their own daughters to their sons in marriage, and they worshipped their gods. Othniel. The people of Israel did evil in God's sight. They forgot their God and worshipped the Baal gods and the Asherah goddesses. God's hot anger blazed against Israel. He sold them off to Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram-Naharaim. The people of Israel were in servitude to Cushan-Rishathaim for 8 years. The people of Israel cried out to God, and God raised up a savior who rescued them. Caleb's nephew, Othniel, son of his younger brother, Kenaz. The Spirit of God came on him, and he rallied Israel. He went out to war, and God gave him Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram-Naharaim. Othniel made short work of him. The land was quiet for 40 years. Then Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. Ehud. But the people of Israel went back to doing evil in God's sight. So God made Eglon, king of Moab, a power against Israel because they did evil in God's sight. He recruited the Ammonites and Amalekites and went out and struck Israel. They took the city of palms. The people of Israel were in servitude to Eglon 14 years. The people of Israel cried out to God, and God raised up for them a savior, Ehud, son of Gera, a Benjaminite. He was left-handed. The people of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon, king of Moab. Ehud made himself a short, two-edged sword and strapped it on his right thigh under his clothes. He presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Eglon was grossly fat. After Ehud finished presenting the tribute, he went a little way with the men who had carried it. But when he got as far as the stone images near Gilgal, he went back and said, "I have a private message for you, O king." The king told his servants, "Leave." They all left. Ehud approached him. The king was now quite alone in his cool rooftop room and said, "I have a word of God for you." Eglon stood up from his throne. Ehud reached with his left hand and took his sword from his right thigh and plunged it into the king's big belly. Not only the blade, but the hilt went in. The fat closed in over it so he couldn't pull it out. Ehud slipped out by way of the porch and shut and locked the doors of the rooftop room behind him. Then he was gone. When the servants came, they saw with surprise that the doors to the rooftop room were locked. They said, "He's probably relieving himself in the restroom." They waited, and then they worried. No one was coming out of those locked doors. Finally, they got a key and unlocked them. There was their master, fallen on the floor, dead. While they were standing around wondering what to do, Ehud was long gone. He got past the stone images and escaped to Seirah. When he got there, he sounded the trumpet on Mount Ephraim. The people of Israel came down from the hills and joined him. He took his place at their head. He said, "Follow me, for God has given your enemies, yes, Moab, to you." They went down after him and secured the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites. They let no one cross over. At that time, they struck down about 10 companies of Moabites, all of them well-fed and robust. Not one escaped. That day, Moab was subdued under the hand of Israel. The land was quiet for 80 years. Shamgar. Shamgar, son of Anath, came after Ehud. Using a cattle prod, he killed 600 Philistines single-handed. He too saved Israel. Chapter 4. Deborah. The people of Israel kept right on doing evil in God's sight. With Ehud dead, God sold them off to Jabin, king of Canaan, who ruled from Hazor. Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim, was the commander of his army. The people of Israel cried out to God because he had cruelly oppressed them with his 900 iron chariots for 20 years. Deborah was a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth. She was judge over Israel at that time. She held court under Deborah's palm between Ramah and Bethel in the hills of Ephraim. The people of Israel went to her in matters of justice. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kedesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "It has become clear that God, the God of Israel, commands you. Go to Mount Tabor and prepare for battle. Take 10 companies of soldiers from Naphtali and Zebulun. I'll take care of getting Sisera, the leader of Jabin's army, to the Kishon River with all his chariots and troops, and I'll make sure you win the battle." Barak said, "If you go with me, I'll go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go." She said, "Of course I'll go with you, but understand that with an attitude like that, there'll be no glory in it for you. God will use a woman's hand to take care of Sisera." Deborah got ready and went with Barak to Kedesh. Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali together at Kedesh. 10 companies of men followed him, and Deborah was with him. It happened that Heber the Kenite had parted company with the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' in-law. He was now living at Zaananim Oak near Kedesh. They told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. Sisera immediately called up all his chariots to the Kishon River, 900 iron chariots, along with all his troops who were with him at Harosheth Hagoyim. Deborah said to Barak, "Charge! This very day God has given you victory over Sisera. Isn't God marching before you?" Barak charged down the slopes of Mount Tabor, his 10 companies following him. God routed Sisera, all those chariots, all those troops, before Barak. Sisera jumped out of his chariot and ran. Barak chased the chariots and troops all the way to Harosheth-Hagoyim. Sisera's entire fighting force was killed. Not one man left. Meanwhile, Sisera, running for his life, headed for the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite. Jabin, king of Hazor, and Heber the Kenite were on good terms with one another. Jael stepped out to meet Sisera and said, "Come in, sir. Stay here with me. Don't be afraid." So he went in with her into her tent. She covered him with a blanket. He said to her, "Please, a little water. I'm thirsty." She opened a bottle of milk, gave him a drink, and then covered him up again. He then said, "Stand at the tent flap. If anyone comes by and asks you, 'Is there anyone here?' tell him, 'No, not a soul.'" Then, while he was fast asleep from exhaustion, Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent peg and hammer, tiptoed toward him, and drove the tent peg through his temple and all the way into the ground. He convulsed and died. Barak arrived in pursuit of Sisera. Jael went out to greet him. She said, "Come, I'll show you the man you're looking for." He went with her, and there he was, Sisera, stretched out, dead, with a tent peg through his temple. On that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the people of Israel. The people of Israel pressed harder and harder on Jabin, king of Canaan, till there was nothing left of him. Chapter 5. That day, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang this song. When they let down their hair in Israel, they let it blow wild in the wind. The people volunteered with abandon. Bless God. Hear, O kings, listen, O princes. To God, yes, to God I'll sing. Make music to God, to the God of Israel. God, when you left Seir, marched across the fields of Edom, earth quaked, yes, the skies poured rain. Oh, the clouds made rivers, mountains leapt before God, the Sinai God, before God, the God of Israel. In the time of Shamgar, son of Anas, and in the time of Jael, public roads were abandoned, travelers went by back roads, warriors became fat and sloppy, no fight left in them. Then you, Deborah, rose up. You got up, a mother in Israel. God chose new leaders who then fought at the gates, and not a shield or spear to be seen among the 40 companies of Israel. Lift your hearts high, O Israel, with abandon, volunteering yourselves with the people. Bless God. You who ride on prize donkeys, comfortably mounted on blankets, and you who walk down the roads, ponder, attend. Gather at the town well and listen to them sing, chanting the tale of God's victories, his victories accomplished in Israel. Then the people of God went down to the city gates. Wake up, Deborah. Wake up, sing a song. On your feet, Barak, take your prisoners, son of Abinoam. Then the remnant went down to greet the brave ones. The people of God joined the mighty ones. The captains from Ephraim came to the valley. Behind you, Benjamin, with your troops. Captains marched down from Makir. From Zebulun, high-ranking leaders came down. Issachar's princes rallied to Deborah. Issachar stood fast with Barak, backing him up on the field of battle. But in Reuben's divisions, there was much second-guessing. Why all those campfire discussions? Diverted and distracted, Reuben's divisions couldn't make up their minds. Gilead played it safe across the Jordan. And Dan, why did he go off sailing? Asher kept his distance on the seacoast, safe and secure in his harbors. But Zebulun risked life and limb, defied death, as did Naphtali on the battle heights. The kings came, they fought. The kings of Canaan fought. At Taanach they fought, at Megiddo's brook. But they took no silver, no plunder. The stars in the sky joined the fight. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrent Kishon swept them away. The torrent attacked them. The torrent Kishon. Oh, you'll stomp on the necks of the strong. Then the hoofs of the horses pounded, charging, stampeding stallions. Curse Miraz, says God's angel. Curse, double curse its people, because they didn't come when God needed them, didn't rally to God's side with valiant fighters. Most blessed of all women is Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of homemaking women. He asked for water. She brought milk. In a handsome bowl she offered cream. She grabbed a tent peg in her left hand. With her right hand she seized a hammer. She hammered Sisera. She smashed his head. She drove a hole through his temple. He slumped at her feet. He fell. He sprawled. He slumped at her feet. He fell. Slumped. Fallen. Dead. Sisera's mother waited at the window, a weary, anxious watch. What's keeping his chariot? What delays his chariot's rumble? The wisest of her ladies-in-waiting answers with calm, reassuring words. Don't you think they're busy at plunder, dividing up the loot? A girl, maybe 2 girls for each man, and for Sisera, a bright silk shirt, a prize fancy silk shirt, and a colorful scarf. Make it 2 scarves to grace the neck of the plunderer. Thus, may all God's enemies perish, while his lovers be like the unclouded sun. The land was quiet for 40 years. Chapter 6. Gideon. Yet again, the people of Israel went back to doing evil in God's sight. God put them under the domination of Midian for 7 years. Midian overpowered Israel. Because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves hideouts in the mountains, caves and forts. When Israel planted its crops, Midian and Amalek, the Easterners, would invade them, camp in their fields, and destroy their crops all the way down to Gaza. They left nothing for them to live on, neither sheep nor ox nor donkey. Bringing their cattle in tents, they came in and took over, like an invasion of locusts. And their camels, past counting. They marched in and devastated the country. The people of Israel, reduced to grinding poverty by Midian, cried out to God for help. One time, when the people of Israel had cried out to God because of Midian, God sent them a prophet with this message. God, the God of Israel, says, I delivered you from Egypt. I freed you from a life of slavery. I rescued you from Egypt's brutality and then from every oppressor. I pushed them out of your way and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am God, your God. Don't for a minute be afraid of the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But you didn't listen to me. One day, the angel of God came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash, the Abiezerite, whose son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress, out of sight of the Midianites. The angel of God appeared to him and said, God is with you, O mighty warrior. Gideon replied, With me, my master? If God is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all the miracle wonders our parents and grandparents told us about, telling us, didn't God deliver us from Egypt? The fact is, God has nothing to do with us. He has turned us over to Midian. But God faced him directly. Go in this strength that is yours. Save Israel from Midian. Haven't I just sent you? Gideon said to him, Me, my master? How and with what could I ever save Israel? Look at me. My clan's the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the runt of the litter. God said to him, I'll be with you. Believe me, you'll defeat Midian as one man. Gideon said, If you're serious about this, do me a favor. Give me a sign to back up what you're telling me. Don't leave until I come back and bring you my gift. He said, I'll wait till you get back. Gideon went and prepared a young goat and a huge amount of unraised bread. He used over half a bushel of flour. He put the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot and took them back under the shade of the oak tree for a sacred meal. The angel of God said to him, Take the meat and unraised bread, place them on that rock, and pour the broth on them. Gideon did it. The angel of God stretched out the tip of the stick he was holding and touched the meat and the bread. Fire broke out of the rock and burned up the meat and bread while the angel of God slipped away out of sight. And Gideon knew it was the angel of God. Gideon said, Oh no, Master, God, I've seen the angel of God face to face. But God reassured him, Easy now, don't panic. You won't die. Then Gideon built an altar there to God and named it God's Peace. It's still called that at Ophrah of Abiezer. That night, this happened. God said to him, Take your father's best 7-year-old bull, the prime one. Tear down your father's Baal altar and chop down the Asherah fertility pole beside it. Then build an altar to God, your God, on the top of this hill. Take the prime bull and present it as a whole burnt offering, using firewood from the Asherah pole that you cut down." Gideon selected 10 men from his servants and did exactly what God had told him. But because of his family and the people in the neighborhood, he was afraid to do it openly. So he did it that night. Early in the morning, the people in town were shocked to find Baal's altar torn down, the Asherah pole beside it chopped down, and the prime bull burning away on the altar that had been built. They kept asking, "Who did this?" Questions and more questions. And then, the answer. Gideon, son of Joash, did it. The men of the town demanded of Joash, "Bring out your son. He must die. Why, he tore down the Baal altar and chopped down the Asherah tree." But Joash stood up to the crowd, pressing in on him. "Are you going to fight Baal's battles for him? Are you going to save him? Anyone who takes Baal's side will be dead by morning. If Baal is a god, in fact, let him fight his own battles and defend his own altar." They nicknamed Gideon that day Jerubbaal, because after he had torn down the Baal altar, he had said, "Let Baal fight his own battles." All the Midianites and Amalekites, the Easterners, got together, crossed the river, and made camp in the valley of Jezreel. God's Spirit came over Gideon. He blew his ram's horn trumpet, and the Abiezrites came out, ready to follow him. He dispatched messengers all through Manasseh, calling them to battle, also to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. They all came. Gideon said to God, "If this is right, if you are using me to save Israel as you've said, then look, I'm placing a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If dew is on the fleece only, but the floor is dry, then I know that you will use me to save Israel as you said." That's what happened. When he got up early the next morning, he wrung out the fleece, enough dew to fill a bowl with water. Then Gideon said to God, "Don't be impatient with me, but let me say one more thing. I want to try another time with the fleece, but this time let the fleece stay dry while the dew drenches the ground." God made it happen that very night. Only the fleece was dry while the ground was wet with dew. Chapter 7. Jerubbaal, Gideon, got up early the next morning, all his troops right there with him. They set up camp at Harod's spring. The camp of Midian was in the plain north of them near the hill of Morah. God said to Gideon, "You have too large an army with you. I can't turn Midian over to them like this. They'll take all the credit, saying, 'I did it all myself,' and forget about me. Make a public announcement. Anyone afraid, anyone who has any qualms at all, may leave Mount Gilead now and go home." 22 companies headed for home. 10 companies were left. God said to Gideon, "There are still too many. Take them down to the stream, and I'll make a final cut. When I say, 'This one goes with you,' he'll go. When I say, 'This one doesn't go,' he won't go." So Gideon took the troops down to the stream. God said to Gideon, "Everyone who laps with his tongue, the way a dog laps, set on one side. And everyone who kneels to drink, drinking with his face to the water, set to the other side." 300 lapped with their tongues from their cupped hands. All the rest knelt to drink. God said to Gideon, "I'll use the 300 men who lapped at the stream to save you and give Midian into your hands. All the rest may go home." After Gideon took all their provisions and trumpets, he sent all the Israelites home. He took up his position with the 300 men. The camp of Midian stretched out below him in the valley. That night, God told Gideon, "Get up and go down to the camp. I've given it to you. If you have any doubts about going down, go down with Purah, your armor bearer. When you hear what they're saying, you'll be bold and confident." He and his armor bearer Purah went down near the place where sentries were posted. Midian and Amalek, all the Easterners, were spread out on the plain like a swarm of locusts, and their camels, past counting, like grains of sand on the seashore. Gideon arrived just in time to hear a man tell his friend a dream. He said, "I had this dream. A loaf of barley bread tumbled into the Midianite camp. It came to the tent and hit it so hard it collapsed. The tent fell." His friend said, "This has to be the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has turned Midian, the whole camp, over to him." When Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he went to his knees before God in prayer. Then he went back to the Israelite camp and said, "Get up and get going. God has just given us the Midianite army." He divided the 300 men into 3 companies. He gave each man a trumpet and an empty jar with a torch in the jar. He said, "Watch me and do what I do. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly what I do. When I and those with me blow the trumpets, you also, all around the camp, blow your trumpets and shout, 'For God and for Gideon.'" Gideon and his 100 men got to the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after the sentries had been posted. They blew the trumpets, at the same time smashing the jars they carried. All 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands, ready to blow, and shouted, "A sword for God and for Gideon!" They were stationed all around the camp, each man at his post. The whole Midianite camp jumped to its feet. They yelled and fled. When the 300 blew the trumpets, God aimed each Midianite's sword against his companion all over the camp. They ran for their lives to Beth-shittah, toward Zererah, to the border of Abel-meholah, near Tabbath. Israelites rallied from Naphtali, from Asher, and from all over Manasseh. They had Midian on the run. Gideon then sent messengers through all the hill country of Ephraim, urging them, "Come down against Midian. Capture the fords of the Jordan at Beth-barah." So all the men of Ephraim rallied and captured the fords of the Jordan at Beth-barah. They also captured the 2 Midianite commanders, Oreb, Raven, and Zeeb, Wolf. They killed Oreb at Raven Rock, Zeeb they killed at Wolf Winepress, and they pressed the pursuit of Midian. They brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon across the Jordan. Chapter 8. Then the Ephraimites said to Gideon, "Why did you leave us out of this, not calling us when you went to fight Midian?" They were indignant and let him know it. But Gideon replied, "What have I done compared to you? Why, even the gleanings of Ephraim are superior to the vintage of Abiezer. God gave you Midian's commanders, Oreb and Zeeb. What have I done compared with you?" When they heard this, they calmed down and cooled off. Gideon and his 300 arrived at the Jordan and crossed over. They were bone tired, but still pressing the pursuit. He asked the men of Succoth, "Please, give me some loaves of bread for my troops I have with me. They're worn out, and I'm hot on the trail of Zebah and Zalmunna, the Midianite kings." But the leaders in Succoth said, "You're on a wild goose chase. Why should we help you on a fool's errand?" Gideon said, "If you say so. But when God gives me Zebah and Zalmunna, I'll give you a thrashing. Whip your bare flesh with desert thorns and thistles." He went from there to Peniel and made the same request. The men of Peniel, like the men of Succoth, also refused. Gideon told them, "When I return safe and sound, I'll demolish this tower." Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with an army of about 15 companies, all that was left of the fighting force of the Easterners. They had lost 120 companies of soldiers. Gideon went up the caravan trail east of Nobah and Jogbehah, found and attacked the undefended camp. Zebah and Zalmunna fled, but he chased and captured the 2 kings of Midian. The whole camp had panicked. Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by way of the Heres Pass. He captured a young man from Succoth and asked some questions. The young man wrote down the names of the officials and leaders of Succoth, 77 men. Then Gideon went to the men of Succoth and said, "Here are the wild geese, Zebah and Zalmunna, you said I'd never catch. You wouldn't give so much as a scrap of bread to my worn-out men. You taunted us, saying that we were on a fool's errand." Then he took the 77 leaders of Succoth and thrashed them with desert thorns and thistles. And he demolished the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the city. He then addressed Zebah and Zalmunna. "Tell me about the men you killed at Tabor." "They were men much like you," they said, "each one like a king's son." Gideon said, "They were my brothers, my mother's sons. As God lives, if you would let them live, I would let you live." Then he spoke to Jether, his firstborn. "Get up and kill them." But he couldn't do it, couldn't draw his sword. He was afraid. He was still just a boy. Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Do it yourself if you're man enough." Gideon did it. He stepped up and killed Zebah and Zalmunna. Then he took the crescents that hung on the necks of their camels. The Israelites said, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson. You have saved us from Midian's tyranny." Gideon said, "I most certainly will not rule over you, nor will my son. God will reign over you." Then Gideon said, "But I do have one request. Give me, each of you, an earring that you took as plunder." Ishmaelites wore gold earrings, and the men all had their pockets full of them. They said, "Of course, they're yours." They spread out a blanket, and each man threw his plundered earrings on it. The gold earrings that Gideon had asked for weighed about 43 pounds, and that didn't include the crescents and pendants, the purple robes worn by the Midianite kings, and the ornaments hung around the necks of their camels. Gideon made the gold into a sacred ephod and put it on display in his hometown, Ophrah. All Israel prostituted itself there. Gideon and his family, too, were seduced by it. Midian's tyranny was broken by the Israelites. Nothing more was heard from them. The land was quiet for 40 years in Gideon's time. Jerubbaal, son of Joash, went home and lived in his house. Gideon had 70 sons. He fathered them all. He had a lot of wives. His concubine, the one at Shechem, also bore him a son. He named him Abimelech. Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age. He was buried in the tomb of his father Joash at Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Abimelech. Gideon was hardly cool in the tomb when the people of Israel had gotten off track and were prostituting themselves to Baal. They made Baal of the covenant their god. The people of Israel forgot all about God, their God, who had saved them from all their enemies who had hemmed them in. And they didn't keep faith with the family of Jerubbaal, Gideon, honoring all the good he had done for Israel. Chapter 9. Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his uncles and all his mother's relatives and said to them, "Ask all the leading men of Shechem, what do you think is best? That 70 men rule you, all those sons of Jerubbaal, or that one man rule? You'll remember that I am your own flesh and blood." His mother's relatives reported the proposal to the leaders of Shechem. They were inclined to take Abimelech, because, they said, he is, after all, one of us. They gave him 70 silver pieces from the shrine of Baal of the covenant. With the money, he hired some reckless riffraff soldiers, and they followed along after him. He went to his father's house in Ophrah and killed his half-brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men, and on one stone. The youngest, Jotham, son of Jerubbaal, managed to hide, the only survivor. Then all the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo gathered at the oak by the standing stone at Shechem and crowned Abimelech king. When this was all told to Jotham, he climbed to the top of Mount Gerizim, raised his voice, and shouted, "Listen to me, leaders of Shechem, and let God listen to you. The tree set out one day to anoint a king for themselves. They said to Olive Tree, 'Rule over us.' But Olive Tree told them, 'Am I no longer good for making oil that gives glory to gods and men, and to be demoted to waving over trees?' The trees then said to Fig Tree, 'You come and rule over us.' But Fig Tree said to them, 'Am I no longer good for making sweets, my mouth-watering sweet fruits, and to be demoted to waving over trees?' The trees then said to Vine, 'You come and rule over us.' But Vine said to them, 'Am I no longer good for making wine, wine that cheers gods and men, and to be demoted to waving over trees?' All the trees then said to Tumbleweed, 'You come and reign over us.' But Tumbleweed said to the trees, 'If you're serious about making me your king, come and find shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire shoot from Tumbleweed and burn down the cedars of Lebanon.' Now listen, do you think you did a right and honorable thing when you made Abimelech king? Do you think you treated Jerubbaal and his family well, did for him what he deserved? My father fought for you, risked his own life, and rescued you from Midian's tyranny, and you have, just now, betrayed him. You massacred his sons, 70 men on a single stone. You made Abimelech, the son by his maidservant, king over Shechem's leaders because he's your relative. If you think that this is an honest day's work, this way you have treated Jerubbaal today, then enjoy Abimelech and let him enjoy you. But if not, let fire break from Abimelech and burn up the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo. And let fire break from the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo and burn up Abimelech." And Jotham fled. He ran for his life. He went to Beer and settled down there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. Abimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years. Then God brought bad blood between Abimelech and Shechem's leaders, who now worked treacherously behind his back. Violence boomeranged. The murderous violence that killed the 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, was now loose among Abimelech and Shechem's leaders, who had supported the violence. To undermine Abimelech, Shechem's leaders put men in ambush on the mountain passes who robbed travelers on those roads, and Abimelech was told. At that time, Gaal, son of Ebed, arrived with his relatives and moved into Shechem. The leaders of Shechem trusted him. One day, they went out into the fields, gathered grapes in the vineyards, and trod them in the winepress. Then they held a celebration in their God's temple, a feast, eating and drinking. And then they started putting down Abimelech. Gaal, son of Ebed, said, "Who is this Abimelech, and who are we Shechemites to take orders from him? Isn't he the son of Jerubbaal, and isn't this his henchman, Zebul? We belong to the race of Hamor, and bear the noble name of Shechem. Why should we be toadies of Abimelech? If I were in charge of this people, the first thing I'd do is get rid of Abimelech. I'd say, 'Show me your stuff, Abimelech. Let's see who's boss here.'" Zebul, governor of the city, heard what Gaal, son of Ebed, was saying and got angry. Secretly, he sent messengers to Abimelech with the message, "Gaal, son of Ebed, and his relatives have come to Shechem and are stirring up trouble against you. Here's what you do. Tonight, bring your troops and wait in ambush in the field. In the morning, as soon as the sun breaks, get moving and charge the city. Gaal and his troops will come out to you, and you'll know what to do next." Abimelech and his troops, 4 companies of them, went up that night and waited in ambush approaching Shechem. Gaal, son of Ebed, had gotten up and was standing in the city gate. Abimelech and his troops left their cover. When Gaal saw them, he said to Zebul, "Look at that, people coming down from the tops of the mountains." Zebul said, "That's nothing but mountain shadows. They just look like men." Gaal kept chattering away. Then he said again, "Look at the troops coming down off Tabor Erez, the navel of the world, and one company coming straight from the Oracle Oak." Zebul said, "Where's that big mouth of yours now? You who said, 'And who is Abimelech that we should take orders from him?' Well, there he is with the troops you ridiculed. Here's your chance. Fight away." Gaal went out, backed by the leaders of Shechem, and did battle with Abimelech. Abimelech chased him, and Gaal turned tail and ran. Many fell wounded, right up to the city gate. Abimelech set up his field headquarters at Arumah, while Zebul kept Gaal and his relatives out of Shechem. The next day, the people went out to the fields. This was reported to Abimelech. He took his troops, divided them into 3 companies, and placed them in ambush in the fields. When he saw that the people were well out in the open, he sprang up and attacked them. Abimelech and the company with him charged ahead and took control of the entrance to the city gate. The other 2 companies chased down those who were in the open fields and killed them. Abimelech fought at the city all that day. He captured the city and massacred everyone in it. He leveled the city to the ground, then sowed it with salt. When the leaders connected with Shechem's tower heard this, they went into the fortified God of the Covenant temple. This was reported to Abimelech that the Shechem's tower bunch were gathered together. He and his troops climbed Mount Zalmon, Dark Mountain. Abimelech took his axe and chopped a bundle of firewood, picked it up, and put it on his shoulder. He said to his troops, "Do what you've seen me do, and quickly." So each of his men cut his own bundle. They followed Abimelech, piled their bundles against the tower fortifications, and set the whole structure on fire. Everyone in Shechem's tower died, about 1,000 men and women. Abimelech went on to Thebez. He camped at Thebez and captured it. The Tower of Strength stood in the middle of the city. All the men and women of the city, along with the city's leaders, had fled there and locked themselves in. They were up on the tower roof. Abimelech got as far as the tower and assaulted it. He came up to the tower door to set it on fire. Just then, some woman dropped an upper millstone on his head and crushed his skull. He called urgently to his young armor-bearer and said, "Draw your sword and kill me so they can't say of me, 'A woman killed him.'" His armor-bearer drove in his sword, and Abimelech died. When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they went home. God avenged the evil Abimelech had done to his father murdering his 70 brothers. And God brought down on the heads of the men of Shechem all the evil that they had done, the curse of Jotham, son of Jerubbaal. Chapter 10. Tola. Tola, son of Puah, the son of Doda, was next after Abimelech. He rose to the occasion to save Israel. He was a man of Issachar. He lived in Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. He judged Israel for 23 years and then died and was buried at Shamir. Jair. After him, Jair the Gileadite stepped into leadership. He judged Israel for 22 years. He had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys and had 30 towns in Gilead. The towns are still called Jair's villages. Jair died and was buried in Canaan. And then the people of Israel went back to doing evil in God's sight. They worshipped the Baal gods and Ashtoreth goddesses, gods of Aram, Sidon, and Moab, gods of the Ammonites and the Philistines. They just walked off and left God, quit worshiping him. And God exploded in hot anger at Israel and sold them off to the Philistines and Ammonites who, beginning that year, bullied and battered the people of Israel mercilessly. For 18 years they had them under their thumb, all the people of Israel who lived east of the Jordan in the Amorite country of Gilead. Then the Ammonites crossed the Jordan to go to war also against Judah, Benjamin, and Ephraim. Israel was in a bad way. The people of Israel cried out to God for help. "We've sinned against you. We've left our God and worshipped the Baal gods." God answered the people of Israel. When the Egyptians, Amorites, Ammonites, Philistines, Sidonians, even Amalek and Midian oppressed you and you cried out to help for me, I saved you from them. And now you've gone off and betrayed me, worshiping other gods. I'm not saving you anymore. Go ahead, cry out for help to the gods you've chosen. Let them get you out of the mess you're in. The people of Israel said to God, "We've sinned. Do to us whatever you think best, but please get us out of this." Then they cleaned house of the foreign gods and worshipped only God. And God took Israel's troubles to heart. Jephthah. The Ammonites prepared for war, setting camp in Gilead. The people of Israel set their rival camp in Mizpah. The leaders in Gilead said, "Who will stand up for us against the Ammonites? We'll make him head over everyone in Gilead." Chapter 11. Jephthah the Gileadite was one tough warrior. He was the son of a whore, but Gilead was his father. Meanwhile, Gilead's legal wife had given him other sons, and when they grew up, his wife's sons threw Jephthah out. They told him, "You're not getting any of our family inheritance. You're the son of another woman." So Jephthah fled from his brothers and went to live in the land of Tob. Some riffraff joined him and went around with him. Some time passed, and then the Ammonites started fighting Israel. With the Ammonites at war with them, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. They said to Jephthah, "Come, be our general, and we'll fight the Ammonites." But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "But you hate me. You kicked me out of my family home. So why are you coming to me now? Because you're in trouble, right?" The elders of Gilead replied, "That's it exactly. We've come to you to get you to go with us and fight the Ammonites. You'll be the head of all of us, all the Gileadites." Jephthah addressed the elders of Gilead. "So, if you bring me back home to fight the Ammonites and God gives them to me, I'll be your head. Is that right?" They said, "God is witness between us. Whatever you say, we'll do." Jephthah went along with the elders of Gilead. The people made him their top man and general. And Jephthah repeated what he had said before God at Mizpah. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites with a message. "What's going on here that you have come into my country picking a fight?" The king of the Ammonites told Jephthah's messengers, "Because Israel took my land when they came up out of Egypt, from the Arnon all the way to the Jabbok and to the Jordan. Give it back peaceably, and I'll go." Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites with the message. Jephthah's word: Israel took no Moabite land and no Ammonite land. When they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the desert as far as the Red Sea, arriving at Kadesh. There, Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, "Let us pass through your land, please." But the king of Edom wouldn't let them. Israel also requested permission from the king of Moab. but he wouldn't let them cross either. They were stopped in their tracks at Kadesh. So they traveled across the desert and circled around the lands of Edom and Moab. They came out east of the land of Moab and set camp on the other side of the Arnon. They didn't set foot in Moabite territory, for Arnon was the Moabite border. Israel then sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, at Heshbon, the capital. Israel asked, "Let us pass, please, through your land on the way to our country." But Sihon didn't trust Israel to cut across his land. He got his entire army together, set up camp at Jahaz, and fought Israel. But God, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his troops to Israel. Israel defeated them. Israel took all the Amorite land, all Amorite land from Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the desert to the Jordan. It was God, the God of Israel, who pushed out the Amorites in favor of Israel. So who do you think you are to try to take it over? Why don't you just be satisfied with what your god Chemosh gives you, and we'll settle for what God, our God, gives us? Do you think you're going to come off better than Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab? Did he get anywhere in opposing Israel? Did he risk war? All this time, it's been 300 years now that Israel has lived in Heshbon and its villages, in Aroer and its villages, and in all the towns along the Arnon. Why didn't you try to snatch them away then? No, I haven't wronged you, but this is an evil thing that you are doing to me by starting a fight today. God the judge will decide between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon. But the king of the Ammonites refused to listen to a word that Jephthah had sent him. God's spirit came upon Jephthah. He went across Gilead and Manasseh, went through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there approached the Ammonites. Jephthah made a vow before God. "If you give me a clear victory over the Ammonites, then I'll give to God whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in one piece from among the Ammonites. I'll offer it up in a sacrificial burnt offering." Then Jephthah was off to fight the Ammonites, and God gave them to him. He beat them soundly, all the way from Aroer to the area around Minnith as far as Abel Keramim. 20 cities. A massacre. Ammonites brought to their knees by the people of Israel. Jephthah came home to Mizpah. His daughter ran from the house to welcome him home, dancing to tambourines. She was his only child. He had no son or daughter except her. When he realized who it was, he ripped his clothes, saying, "Dearest daughter, I'm dirt. I'm despicable. My heart is torn to shreds. I made a vow to God, and I can't take it back." She said, "Dear father, if you made a vow to God, do to me what you vowed. God did his part and saved you from your Ammonite enemies." And then she said to her father, "But let this one thing be done for me. Give me 2 months to wander through the hills and lament my virginity, since I will never marry, I and my dear friends." "Oh, yes, go," he said. He sent her off for 2 months. She and her dear girlfriends went among the hills, lamenting that she would never marry. At the end of the 2 months, she came back to her father. He fulfilled the vow with her that he had made. She had never slept with a man. It became a custom in Israel that for 4 days every year, the young women of Israel went out to mourn for the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite. Chapter 12. The men of Ephraim mustered their troops, crossed to Zaphon, and said to Jephthah, "Why did you go out to fight the Ammonites without letting us go with you? We're going to burn your house down on you." Jephthah said, "I and my people had our hands full negotiating with the Ammonites, and I did call to you for help, but you ignored me. When I saw that you weren't coming, I took my life in my hands and confronted the Ammonites myself, and God gave them to me. So why did you show up here today? Are you spoiling for a fight with me?" So Jephthah got his Gilead troops together and fought Ephraim. And the men of Gilead hit them hard because they were saying, "Gileadites are nothing but half-breeds and rejects from Ephraim and Manasseh." Gilead captured the fords of the Jordan at the crossing to Ephraim. If an Ephraimite fugitive said, "Let me cross," the men of Gilead would ask, "Are you an Ephraimite?" And he would say, "No." And they would say, "Say Shibboleth." But he would always say Sibboleth. He couldn't say it right. Then they would grab him and kill him there at the fords of the Jordan. 42 Ephraimite divisions were killed on that occasion. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Jephthah, the Gileadite, died and was buried in his city, Mizpah of Gilead. Ibzan. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gave his daughters in marriage outside his clan and brought in 30 daughters-in-law from the outside for his sons. He judged Israel 7 years. Ibzan died and was buried in Bethlehem. Elon. After him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel. He judged Israel 10 years. Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried at Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. Abdon. After him, Abdon, son of Hillel the Pirathonite, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. He judged Israel 8 years. Abdon, son of Hillel the Pirathonite, died and was buried at Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the Amalekite hill country. Chapter 13. Samson. And then the people of Israel were back at it again, doing what was evil in God's sight. God put them under the domination of the Philistines for 40 years. At that time, there was a man named Manoah from Zorah, from the tribe of Dan. His wife was barren and childless. The angel of God appeared to her and told her, I know you are barren and childless, but you're going to become pregnant and bear a son. But take much care. Drink no wine or beer. Eat nothing ritually unclean. You are, in fact, pregnant right now, carrying a son. No razor will touch his head. The boy will be God's Nazirite from the moment of his birth. He will launch the deliverance from Philistine oppression. The woman went to her husband and said, A man of God came to me. He looked like the angel of God, terror laced with glory. I didn't ask him where he was from, and he didn't tell me his name, but he told me, You're pregnant. You're going to give birth to a son. Don't drink any wine or beer, and eat nothing ritually unclean. The boy will be God's Nazirite from the moment of birth to the day of his death. Manoah prayed to God, Master, let the man of God you sent come to us again and teach us how to raise this boy who is to be born. God listened to Manoah. God's angel came again to the woman. She was sitting in the field. Her husband Manoah wasn't there with her. She jumped to her feet and ran and told her husband, He's back, the man who came to me that day. Manoah got up and following his wife came to the man. He said to him, Are you the man who spoke to my wife? He said, I am. Manoah said, So when what you say comes true, what do you have to tell us about this boy and his work? The angel of God said to Manoah, Keep in mind everything I told the woman. Eat nothing that comes from the vine. Drink no wine or beer. Eat no ritually unclean foods. She's to observe everything I commanded her. Manoah said to the angel of God, Please, stay with us a little longer. We'll prepare a meal for you, a young goat. God's angel said to Manoah, Even if I stay, I won't eat your food. But if you want to prepare a whole burnt offering for God, go ahead, offer it. Manoah had no idea that he was talking to the angel of God. Then Manoah asked the angel of God, What's your name? When your words come true, we'd like to honor you. The angel of God said, What's this? You ask for my name? You wouldn't understand. It's sheer wonder. So Manoah took the kid and the grain offering and sacrificed them on a rock altar to God, who works wonders. As the flames leapt up from the altar to heaven, God's angel also ascended in the altar flames. When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell face down to the ground. Manoah and his wife never saw the angel of God again. Only then did Manoah realize that this was God's angel. He said to his wife, We're as good as dead. We've looked on God. But his wife said, If God were planning to kill us, he wouldn't have accepted our whole burnt offering and grain offering or revealed all these things to us, given us this birth announcement. The woman gave birth to a son. They named him Samson. The boy grew and God blessed him. The Spirit of God began working in him while he was staying at a Danite camp between Zorah and Eshtaol. Chapter 14. Samson went down to Timnah. There in Timnah, a woman caught his eye, a Philistine girl. He came back and told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, a Philistine girl. Get her for me as my wife. His parents said to him, Isn't there a woman among the girls in the neighborhood of our people? Do you have to go get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the one I want. She's the right one." His father and mother had no idea that God was behind this, that he was arranging an opportunity against the Philistines. At the time, the Philistines lorded it over Israel. Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother. When he got to the vineyards of Timnah, a young lion came at him, roaring. The Spirit of God came on him powerfully, and he ripped it open barehanded, like tearing a young goat. But he didn't tell his parents what he had done. Then he went on down and spoke to the woman. In Samson's eyes, she was the one. Some days later, when he came back to get her, he made a little detour to look at what was left of the lion. And there, a wonder, a swarm of bees in the lion's carcass, and honey. He scooped it up in his hands and kept going, eating as he went. He rejoined his father and mother and gave some to them, and they ate. But he didn't tell them that he had scooped out the honey from the lion's carcass. His father went on down to make arrangements with the woman, while Samson prepared a feast there. That's what the young men did in those days. Because the people were wary of him, they arranged for 30 friends to mingle with him. Samson said to them, "Let me put a riddle to you. If you can figure it out during the 7 days of the feast, I'll give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of fine clothing. But if you can't figure it out, then you'll give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of fine clothing." They said, "Put your riddle, let's hear it." So he said, "From the eater came something to eat. From the strong came something sweet." They couldn't figure it out. After 3 days, they were still stumped. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's bride, "Worm the answer out of your husband, or we'll burn you and your father's household. Have you invited us here to bankrupt us?" So Samson's bride turned on the tears, saying to him, "You hate me. You don't love me. You have told a riddle to my people, but you won't even tell me the answer." He said, "I haven't told my own parents. Why would I tell you?" But she turned on the tears all the 7 days of the feast. On the 7th day, worn out by her nagging, he told her. Then she went and told it to her people. The men of the town came to him on the 7th day, just before sunset, and said, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" And Samson said, "If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have found out my riddle." Then the Spirit of God came powerfully on him. He went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of their men, stripped them, and gave their clothing to those who had solved the riddle. Stalking out, smoking with anger, he went home to his father's house. Samson's bride became the wife of the best man at his wedding. Chapter 15. Later on, it was during the wheat harvest, Samson visited his bride, bringing a young goat. He said, "Let me see my wife. Show me her bedroom." But her father wouldn't let him in. He said, "I concluded that by now you hated her with a passion. So I gave her to your best man. But her little sister is even more beautiful. Why not take her instead?" Samson said, "That does it. This time when I wreak havoc on the Philistines, I'm blameless." Samson then went out and caught 300 jackals. He lashed the jackals' tails together in pairs and tied a torch between each pair of tails. He then set fire to the torches and let them loose in the Philistine fields of ripe grain. Everything burned, both stacked and standing grain, vineyards and olive orchards, everything. The Philistines said, "Who did this?" They were told, "Samson, son-in-law of the Timnite, who took his bride and gave her to his best man." The Philistines went up and burned both her and her father to death. Samson then said, "If this is the way you're going to act, I swear I'll get even with you, and I'm not quitting till the job's done." With that, he tore into them, ripping them limb from limb, a huge slaughter. Then he went down and stayed in a cave at Edom Rock. The Philistines set out and made camp in Judah, preparing to attack Lehi, Jawbone. When the men of Judah asked, "Why have you come up against us?" they said, "We're out to get Samson. We're going after Samson to do to him what he did to us." 3 companies of men from Judah went down to the cave at Edom Rock and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines already bully and lord it over us? So what's going on with you, making things even worse?" He said, "It was tit for tat. I only did to them what they did to me." They said, "Well, "We've come down here to tie you up and turn you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Just promise not to hurt me." "We promise," they said. "We will tie you up and surrender you to them, but believe us, we won't kill you." They proceeded to tie him with new ropes and let him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came to meet him, shouting in triumph. And then the Spirit of God came on him with great power. The ropes on his arms fell apart like flax on fire. The thong slipped off his hands. He spotted a fresh donkey jawbone, reached down and grabbed it, and with it, killed the whole company. And Samson said, "With a donkey's jawbone, I made heaps of donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I killed an entire company." When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone. He named that place Ramath Lehi, Jawbone Hill. Now, he was suddenly very thirsty. He called out to God, "You have given your servant this great victory. Are you going to abandon me to die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" So God split open the rock basin in Lehi. Water gushed out, and Samson drank. His spirit revived. He was alive again. That's why it's called En Hakor, Caller's Spring. It's still there at Lehi today. Samson judged Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Chapter 16. Samson went to Gaza and saw a prostitute. He went to her. The news got around. Samson's here. They gathered around in hiding, waiting all night for him at the city gate, quiet as mice, thinking, "At sunrise, we'll kill him." Samson was in bed with the woman until midnight. Then he got up, seized the doors of the city gate and the 2 gateposts, bolts and all, hefted them on his shoulder, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, grapes. Her name was Delilah. The Philistine tyrants approached her and said, "Seduce him. Discover what's behind his great strength and how we can tie him up and humble him. Each man's company will give you 100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me, dear, the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and humbled." Samson told her, "If they were to tie me up with 7 bowstrings, the kind made from fresh animal tendons, not dried out, then I would become weak, just like anyone else." The Philistine tyrants brought her 7 bowstrings, not dried out, and she tied him up with them. The men were waiting in ambush in her room. Then she said, "The Philistines are on you, Samson." He snapped the cords as though they were mere threads. The secret of his strength was still a secret. Delilah said, "Come now, Samson, you're playing with me, making up stories. Be serious. Tell me how you can be tied up." He told her, "If you were to tie me up tight with new ropes, ropes never used for work, then I would be helpless, just like anybody else." So Delilah got some new ropes and tied him up. She said, "The Philistines are on you, Samson." The men were hidden in the next room. He snapped the ropes from his arms like threads. Delilah said to Samson, "You're still playing games with me, teasing me with lies. Tell me how you can be tied up." He said to her, "If you wove the 7 braids of my hair into the fabric on the loom and drew it tight, then I would be as helpless as any other mortal." When she had him fast asleep, Delilah took the 7 braids of his hair and wove them into the fabric on the loom and drew it tight. Then she said, "The Philistines are on you, Samson." He woke from his sleep and ripped loose from both the loom and fabric. She said, "How can you say I love you when you won't even trust me? 3 times now you've toyed with me like a cat with a mouse, refusing to tell me the secret of your great strength." She kept at it day after day, nagging and tormenting him. Finally, he was fed up. He couldn't take another minute of it. He spilled it. He told her, "A razor has never touched my head. I've been God's Nazarite from conception. If I were shaved, my strength would leave me. I would be as helpless as any other mortal." When Delilah realized that he had told her his secret, she sent for the Philistine tyrants, telling them, "Come quickly, this time he's told me the truth." They came, bringing the bribe money. When she got him to sleep, his head on her lap, she motioned to a man to cut off the 7 braids of his hair. Immediately, he began to grow weak. His strength drained from him. Then she said, "The Philistines are on you, Samson." He woke up thinking, "I'll go out like always and shake free." He didn't realize that God had abandoned him. The Philistines grabbed him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. They shackled him in irons and put him to the work of grinding in the prison. But his hair, though cut off, began to grow again. The Philistine tyrants got together to offer a great sacrifice to their god, Dagon. They celebrated, saying, "Our God has given us Samson, our enemy." And when the people saw him, they joined in, cheering their God. "Our God has given our enemy to us, the one who ravaged our country, piling high the corpses among us." Then this. Everyone was feeling high, and someone said, "Get Samson. Let him show us his stuff." They got Samson from the prison, and he put on a show for them. They had him standing between the pillars. Samson said to the young man who was acting as his guide, "Put me where I can touch the pillars that hold up the temple so I can rest against them." The building was packed with men and women, including all the Philistine tyrants. And there were at least 3,000 in the stands watching Samson's performance. And Samson cried out to God, "Master, God, oh please, look on me again. Oh please, give strength yet once more. God, with one avenging blow, let me be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Then Samson reached out to the 2 central pillars that held up the building and pushed against them, one with his right arm, the other with his left, saying, "Let me die with the Philistines." Samson pushed hard with all his might. The building crashed on the tyrants and all the people in it. He killed more people in his death than he had killed in his life. His brothers and all his relatives went down to get the body. They carried him back and buried him in the tomb of Manoah, his father, between Zorah and Eshtaol. He judged Israel for 20 years. Chapter 17. Micah. There was a man from the hill country of Ephraim named Micah. He said to his mother, "Remember that 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you? I overheard you when you pronounced your curse. Well, I have the money. I stole it, but now I brought it back to you." His mother said, "God bless you, my son." As he returned the 1,100 silver pieces to his mother, she said, "I had totally consecrated this money to God for my son to make a statue, a cast god." Then she took 200 pieces of the silver and gave it to a sculptor, and he cast them into the form of a god. This man, Micah, had a private chapel. He had made an ephod and some teraphim idols and had ordained one of his sons to be his priest. In those days, there was no king in Israel. People did whatever they felt like doing. Meanwhile, there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah and from a family of Judah. He was a Levite, but was a stranger there. He left that town, Bethlehem in Judah, seeking his fortune. He got as far as the hill country of Ephraim and showed up at Micah's house. Micah asked him, "So where are you from?" He said, "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah. I'm on the road, looking for a place to settle down." Micah said, "Stay here with me. Be my father and priest. I'll pay you 10 pieces of silver a year, whatever clothes you need, and your meals." The Levite agreed and moved in with Micah. The young man fit right in and became one of the family. Micah appointed the young Levite as his priest. This all took place in Micah's home. Micah said, "Now I know that God will make things go well for me. Why, I've got a Levite for a priest." Chapter 18. In those days, there was no king in Israel. But also in those days, the tribe of Dan was looking for a place to settle down. They hadn't yet occupied their plot among the tribes of Israel. The Danites sent out 5 robust warriors from Zorah and Eshtaol to look over the land and see what was out there suitable for their families. They said, "Go and explore the land." They went into the hill country of Ephraim and got as far as the house of Micah. They camped there for the night. As they neared Micah's house, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. They went over and said to him, "How on earth did you get here? What's going on? What are you doing here?" He said, "One thing led to another. Micah hired me, and I'm now his priest." They said, "Oh, good. Inquire of God for us. Find out whether our mission will be a success." The priest said, Go assured, God's looking out for you all the way." The 5 men left and headed north to Laish. They saw that the people there were living in safety under the umbrella of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting. They had everything going for them. But the people lived a long way from the Sidonians to the west and had no treaty with the Arameans to the east. When they got back to Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers asked, "So, how did you find things?" They said, "Let's go for it. Let's attack. We've seen the land and it is excellent. Are you going to just sit on your hands? Don't dawdle. Invade and conquer. When you get there, you'll find they're sitting ducks, totally unsuspecting. Wide open land. God is handing it over to you. Everything you could ever ask for." So 600 Danite men set out from Zorah and Eshtaol, armed to the teeth. Along the way, they made camp at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. That is why the place is still today called Dan's Camp. It's just west of Kiriath Jearim. From there, they proceeded into the hill country of Ephraim and came to Micah's house. The 5 men who earlier had explored the country of Laish told their companions, "Did you know there's an ephod, teraphim idols, and a cast god sculpture in these buildings? What do you think? Do you want to do something about it?" So they turned off the road there, went to the house of the young Levite at Micah's place, and asked how things had been with him. The 600 Danites, all well armed, stood guard at the entrance to the gate, while the 5 scouts who had gone to explore the land went in and took the carved idol, the ephod, the teraphim idols, and the god sculpture. The priest was standing at the gate entrance with the 600 armed men. When the 5 went into Micah's house and took the carved idol, the ephod, the teraphim idols, and the sculpted god, the priest said to them, "What do you think you're doing?" They said to him, "Hush, don't make a sound. Come with us. Be our father and priest. Which is more important, that you become a priest to one man, or that you become priest to a whole tribe and clan in Israel?" The priest jumped at the chance. He took the ephod, the teraphim idols, and the idol, and fell in with the troops. They turned away and set out, putting the children, the cattle, and the gear in the lead. They were well on their way from Micah's house before Micah and his neighbors got organized. But they soon overtook the Danites. They shouted at them. The Danites turned around and said, "So what's all the noise about?" Micah said, "You took my God, the one I made, and you took my priest, and you marched off. What do I have left? How can you now say, 'What's the matter?'" But the Danites answered, "Don't yell at us. You just might provoke some fierce, hot-tempered men to attack you, and you'll end up an army of dead men." The Danites went on their way. Micah saw that he didn't stand a chance against their arms. He turned back and went home. So they took the things that Micah had made, along with his priest, and they arrived at Laish, that city of quiet and unsuspecting people. They massacred the people and burned down the city. There was no one around to help. They were a long way from Sidon and had no treaty with the Arameans. Laish was in the valley of Beth Rehob. When they rebuilt the city, they renamed it Dan after their ancestor, who was the son of Israel, but its original name was Laish. The Danites set up the God figure for themselves. Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his descendants were priests to the tribe of Dan down to the time of the land's captivity. All during the time that there was the sanctuary of God in Shiloh, they kept for their private use the God figure that Micah had made. Chapter 19. The Levite. It was an era when there was no king in Israel. A Levite, living as a stranger in the backwoods hill country of Ephraim, got himself a concubine, a woman from Bethlehem in Judah. But she quarreled with him and left, returning to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah. She was there 4 months. Then her husband decided to go after her and try to win her back. He had a servant and a pair of donkeys with him. When he arrived at her father's house, the girl's father saw him, welcomed him, and made him feel at home. His father-in-law, the girl's father, pressed him to stay. He stayed with him 3 days. They feasted and drank and slept. On the 4th day, they got up at the crack of dawn and got ready to go. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Strengthen yourself with a hearty breakfast, and then you can go." So they sat down and ate breakfast together. The girl's father said to the man, "Come now, be my guest. Stay the night. Make it a holiday." The man got up to go, but his father-in-law kept after him, so he ended up spending another night. On the 5th day, he was again up early, ready to go. The girl's father said, "You need some breakfast." They went back and forth, and the day slipped on as they ate and drank together. But the man and his concubine were finally ready to go. Then his father-in-law, the girl's father, said, "Look, the day's almost gone. Why not stay the night? There's very little daylight left. Stay another night and enjoy yourself. Tomorrow you can get an early start and set off for your own place." But this time, the man wasn't willing to spend another night. He got things ready, left, and went as far as Jebus, Jerusalem, with his pair of saddled donkeys, his concubine, and his servant. At Jebus, though, the day was nearly gone. The servant said to his master, "It's late. Let's go into this Jebusite city and spend the night." But his master said, "We're not going into any city of foreigners. We'll go on to Gibeah." He directed his servant, "Keep going. Let's go on ahead. We'll spend the night either at Gibeah or Ramah." So they kept going. As they pressed on, the sun finally left them in the vicinity of Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They left the road there to spend the night at Gibeah. The Levite went and sat down in the town square, but no one invited them in to spend the night. Then, late in the evening, an old man came in from his day's work in the fields. He was from the hill country of Ephraim and lived temporarily in Gibeah, where all the local citizens were Benjaminites. When the old man looked up and saw the traveler in the town square, he said, "Where are you going and where are you from?" The Levite said, "We're just passing through. We're coming from Bethlehem on our way to a remote spot in the hills of Ephraim. I come from there. I've just made a trip to Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm on my way back home. But no one has invited us in for the night. It wouldn't be any trouble. We have food and straw for the donkeys and bread and wine for the woman, the young man, and me. We don't need anything." The old man said, "It's going to be all right. I'll take care of you. You aren't going to spend the night in the town square." He took them home and fed the donkeys. They washed up and sat down to a good meal. They were relaxed and enjoying themselves when the men of the city, a gang of local hell-raisers all, surrounded the house and started pounding on the door. They yelled for the owner of the house, the old man. "Bring out the man who came to your house. We want to have sex with him." He went out and told them, "No, brothers, don't be obscene. This man is my guest. Don't commit this outrage. Look, my virgin daughter and his concubine are here. I'll bring them out for you. Abuse them if you must, but don't do anything so senselessly vile to this man." But the men wouldn't listen to him. Finally, the Levite pushed his concubine out the door to them. They raped her repeatedly all night long. Just before dawn, they let her go. The woman came back and fell at the door of the house where her master was sleeping. When the sun rose, there she was. It was morning. Her master got up and opened the door to continue his journey. There she was, his concubine, crumpled in a heap at the door, her hands on the threshold. "Get up," he said. "Let's get going." There was no answer. He lifted her onto his donkey and set out for home. When he got home, he took a knife and dismembered his concubine, cut her into 12 pieces. He sent her, piece by piece, throughout the country of Israel. And he ordered the men he sent out, "Say to every man in Israel, has such a thing as this ever happened from the time the Israelites came up from the land of Egypt until now? Think about it. Talk it over. Do something." Chapter 20. Then all the people of Israel came out. The congregation met in the presence of God at Mizpah. They were all there, from Dan to Beersheba, as one person. The leaders of all the people, representing all the tribes of Israel, took their places in the gathering of God's people. There were 400 divisions of sword-wielding infantry. Meanwhile, the Benjaminites got wind that the Israelites were meeting at Mizpah. The people of Israel said, "Now tell us, how did this outrageous evil happen?" The Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, spoke. "My concubine and I came to spend the night at Gibeah, a Benjaminite town. That night, the men of Gibeah came after me. They surrounded the house, intending to kill me. They gang-raped my concubine, and she died. So I took my concubine, cut up her body, and sent her piece by piece, 12 pieces, to every part of Israel's inheritance. This vile and outrageous crime was committed in Israel. So, Israelites, make up your minds. Decide on some action." All the people were at once as one person on their feet. "None of us will go home. Not a single one of us will go to his own house. Here's our plan for dealing with Gibeah. will march against it by drawing lots. We'll take 10 of every 100 men from all the tribes of Israel, 100 of every 1,000, and 1,000 of every 10,000, to carry food for the army. When the troops arrive at Gibeah, they will settle accounts for this outrageous and vile evil that was done in Israel." So all the men in Israel were gathered against the city, totally united. The Israelite tribes sent messengers throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What's the meaning of this outrage that took place among you? Surrender the men right here and now, these hell-raisers of Gibeah. We'll put them to death and burn the evil out of Israel." But they wouldn't do it. The Benjaminites refused to listen to their brothers, the people of Israel. Instead, they raised an army from all their cities and rallied at Gibeah to go to war against the people of Israel. In no time at all, they had recruited from their cities 26 divisions of sword-wielding infantry. From Gibeah, they got 700 hand-picked fighters, the best. There were another 700 super marksmen who were ambidextrous. They could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. The men of Israel, excluding Benjamin, mobilized 400 divisions of sword-wielding fighting men. They set out and went to Bethel to inquire of God. The people of Israel said, "Who of us shall be first to go into battle with the Benjaminites?" God said, "Judah goes first." The people of Israel got up the next morning and camped before Gibeah. The army of Israel marched out against Benjamin and took up their positions, ready to attack Gibeah. But the Benjaminites poured out of Gibeah and devastated 22 Israelite divisions on the ground. The Israelites went back to the sanctuary and wept before God until evening. They again inquired of God, "Shall we again go into battle against the Benjaminites, our brothers?" God said, "Yes, attack." The army took heart. The men of Israel took up the positions they had deployed on the first day. On the second day, the Israelites again advanced against Benjamin. This time, as the Benjaminites came out of the city, on this second day, they devastated another 18 Israelite divisions, all swordsmen. All the people of Israel, the whole army, were back at Bethel, weeping, sitting there in the presence of God. That day, they fasted until evening. They sacrificed whole burnt offerings and peace offerings before God. And they again inquired of God. The chest of God's covenant was there at that time, with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, as the ministering priest. They asked, "Shall we again march into battle against the Benjaminites, our brothers? Or should we call it quits?" And God said, "Attack. Tomorrow I'll give you victory." This time, Israel placed men in ambush all around Gibeah. On the third day when Israel set out, they took up the same positions before the Benjaminites as before. When the Benjaminites came out to meet the army, they moved out from the city. Benjaminites began to cut down some of the troops just as they had before. About 30 men fell in the field and on the roads to Bethel and Gibeah. The Benjaminites started bragging, "We're dropping them like flies just as before." But the Israelites strategized. "Now let's retreat and pull them out of the city onto the main roads." So every Israelite moved farther out to Baal Tamar. At the same time, the Israelite ambush rushed from its place west of Gibeah. 10 crack divisions from all over Israel now arrived at Gibeah. Intense, bloody fighting. The Benjaminites had no idea that they were about to go down in defeat. God routed them before Israel. The Israelites decimated 25 divisions of Benjamin that day. 25,100 killed. They were all swordsmen. The Benjaminites saw that they were beaten. The men of Israel acted like they were retreating before Benjamin, knowing that they could depend on the ambush they had prepared for Gibeah. The ambush erupted and made quick work of Gibeah. The ambush spread out and massacred the city. The strategy for the main body of the ambush was that they send up a smoke signal from the city. Then the men of Israel would turn in battle. When that happened, Benjamin had killed about 30 Israelites and thought they were on their way to victory, yelling out, "They're on the run, just as in the first battle." But then the signal went up from the city, a huge column of smoke. When the Benjaminites looked back, there it was, the whole city going up in smoke. By the time the men of Israel had turned back on them, the men of Benjamin fell apart. They could see that they were trapped. Confronted by the Israelites, they tried to get away down the wilderness road, but by now the battle was everywhere. The men of Israel poured out of the towns, killing them right and left, hot on their trail, picking them off east of Gibeah. 18 divisions of Benjaminites were wiped out. all their best fighters. 5 divisions turned to escape to the wilderness, to Rimmon Rock, but the Israelites caught and slaughtered them on roads. Keeping the pressure on, the Israelites brought down 2 more divisions. The total of the Benjaminites killed that day came to 25 divisions of infantry, their best swordsmen. 600 men got away. They made it to Rimmon Rock in the wilderness and held out there for 4 months. The men of Israel came back and killed all the Benjaminites who were left, all the men and animals they found in every town, and then torched the towns, sending them up in flames. Chapter 21. Wives. Back at Mizpah, the men of Israel had taken an oath. No man among us will give his daughter to a Benjaminite in marriage. Now, back in Bethel, the people sat in the presence of God until evening. They cried loudly. There was widespread lamentation. They said, "Why, O God, God of Israel, has this happened? Why do we find ourselves today missing one whole tribe from Israel?" Early the next morning, the people got busy and built an altar. They sacrificed whole burnt offerings and peace offerings. Then the Israelites said, "Who from all the tribes of Israel didn't show up as we gathered in the presence of God?" For they had all taken a sacred oath that anyone who had not gathered in the presence of God at Mizpah had to be put to death. But the people of Israel were feeling sorry for Benjamin, their brothers. They said, "Today, one tribe is cut off from Israel. How can we get wives for those who are left? We have sworn by God not to give any of our daughters to them in marriage." They said, "Which one of the tribes of Israel didn't gather before God at Mizpah?" It turned out that no one had come to the gathering from Jabesh Gilead. When they took a roll call of the people, not a single person from Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent 12 divisions of their top men there with the command, "Kill everyone at Jabesh Gilead, including women and children. These are your instructions. Every man and woman who has had sexual intercourse you must kill, but keep the virgins alive." And that's what they did. And they found 400 virgins among those who lived in Jabesh Gilead. They had never had sexual intercourse with a man. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Then the congregation sent word to the Benjaminites who were at the Rimmon Rock and offered them peace. And Benjamin came. They gave them the women they had let live at Jabesh Gilead. But even then, there weren't enough for all the men. The people felt bad for Benjamin. God had left out Benjamin, the missing piece from the Israelite tribes. The elders of the congregation said, "How can we get wives for the rest of the men, since all the Benjaminite women have been killed? How can we keep the inheritance alive for the Benjaminite survivors? How can we prevent an entire tribe from extinction? We certainly can't give our own daughters to them as wives." Remember, the Israelites had taken the oath, "Cursed is anyone who provides a wife to Benjamin." Then they said, "There's that festival of God held every year in Shiloh. It's north of Bethel, just east of the main road that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and a little south of Lebanon." So they told the Benjaminites, "Go and hide in the vineyards. Stay alert. When you see the Shiloh girls come out to dance the dances, run out of the vineyards, grab one of the Shiloh girls for your wife, and then hightail it back to the country of Benjamin. When their fathers or brothers come to lay charges against us, we'll tell them, 'We did them a favor. After all, we didn't go to war and kill to get wives for men. And it wasn't as if you were in on it by giving consent. But if you keep this up, you will incur blame.'" And that's what the Benjaminites did. They carried off girls from the dance, wives enough for their number, got away, and went home to their inheritance. They rebuilt their towns and settled down. From there, the people of Israel dispersed, each man heading back to his own tribe and clan, each to his own plot of land. At that time, there was no king in Israel. People did whatever they felt like doing.